Hi, this is Cy from Music Radar. I'm here today with Teenage Engineering's new EP113 KO2. It's a new digital hardware sampler from Swedish brand Teenage Engineering. It's been out for around 2 months now, caused a lot of hype when it was first announced, but it's also proved to be a little bit divisive among users. So let's take a look at it today. I'm going to give you 3 things we love about it, 3 things we're not so sure about, and a little verdict telling you everything you need to know. The first thing I really like about the KO2 is its general design and its overall look. So the KO2 is effectively an update to this. This is the KO1, which is one of Teenage Engineering's old pocket operators. The pocket operators, for those who've never seen them, are these kind of little battery-powered, fun, small, and kind of fiddly digital synths, samplers, and drum machines. Now, these are some of the most fun and cool budget instruments on the market. They all retail for like well under £100, and they're some of the best and cheapest little kind of gadgets you can get just to create noise. That being said, they're all a little bit fiddly. They are, as you can see, without any cases on, a bit kind of basic looking. And as much as they're really fun for kind of just messing around and creating some ideas, they're not really what you would call proper kind of studio or live instruments, more kind of little fun noise generators. The reason that the KO2 is kind of exciting is because it basically takes all the things that are fun about a pocket operator, but puts it into a form factor that's a bit bigger and a bit more professional looking and feeling. Now, I think Teenage Engineering have done a really good job of basically capturing the essence of what makes these pocket operators really fun and putting it into a more usable format without losing that kind of fun factor. So I really like the look of the KO2. It's got this kind of very retro, sort of computery thing that looks like it could be some sort of prop from something like 2001: A Space Odyssey. And at Music Radar, we're always big fans of that kind of retro futuristic look. I'm also a sucker for these clicky buttons, which are kind of retro looking and feeling, but actually feel surprisingly nice to play. And they're pressure sensitive, so you can get different velocity levels and you can use pressure to control the effects, which we'll come on to in a bit. Now, there's one thing that we should definitely address when we're talking about the design and build of these, which is this fader. So if you look on any posts about the KO2 online, it's not long before you'll find some users complaining about build quality and people complaining about issues they've had with units that they ordered when the KO2 was first announced. Most of these focus on people mentioning that their faders either are broken and don't work or a bit unreliable. This isn't really something I can comment on because this review unit of ours has been working perfectly the entire time that we've been using it. I will admit that the fader is a little bit wobbly and doesn't have massive travel, but for what it's used for, which is mostly making parameter changes and automating various things, I don't find that too much of a problem. It is worth saying that actually when we've reviewed some Teenage Engineering things in the past, such as their little DIY modular kits, we have had issues with build quality. So it's not unheard of, but in terms of the KO2, at least the one we have here, everything has always worked perfectly and it feels and looks nice. Because it's bigger than a pocket operator, the KO2 is automatically a lot more usable. While these are kind of fun to play sounds on, they can be fiddly for sequencing or making real edits with these little knobs here. By making this KO2 a bit bigger with kind of decent sized controls, it's immediately a lot more usable in the studio. That being said, some of the kind of esoteric touches of the pocket operators are still here, such as this screen, which does give you a lot of information, but it's not necessarily the most clear and straightforward display. And the labeling isn't entirely great. Some things are quite easy to find. Obviously, you've got all these secondary functions named above and on these buttons, but there is also quite a lot of menu diving involved, and not all of that is that clearly labeled on the unit itself. So you will likely find that if you pick one of these up, you're probably going to end up spending quite a lot of time checking on the manual before you get your head around the workflow. What Teenage Engineering have done a good job is keeping the immediacy of these pocket operators. Although, as we said, you will probably end up looking at the user manual to work out what's going on a few times. Generally speaking, once you've got your head around it, the process of recording just by hitting these two buttons, or by step sequencing, by scrolling through different steps and assigning hits to different steps or erasing like that, it's a pretty quick and fun sequencing workflow. It's also not too difficult to manipulate sounds, particularly when it comes to manipulating sounds as groups, which this fader is used for. By holding down fader and selecting any of these level, pitch, time, filters, effects, attack and release, we can kind of manipulate all of the sounds in one of these A, B, C and D groups so that we can kind of manipulate and mess up a whole group of samples at once. Once you get your head around and get used to doing that, it's quite a fun way to creatively mangle sounds. The process of sampling on here is really quick and easy, which is something we really love. If we press sample here, we've got two options to sample. We've got an input here, which is a mini jack input, so we could hook that up to a phone, an instrument, or say a laptop or even a vinyl turntable to capture something from YouTube or a record or just anything out and about. But we've also got an inbuilt mic, just like on the original KO. That means we can just capture sounds from the world around us. And this works quite nicely and easily. I've hit sample there to enter sample mode. Now all I need to do is hold down any one of these pads and I can sample to it directly. So let's try something on here. So we've captured a couple of sounds onto those pads, just basic things just from the mic. And it's now really easy to start playing and just throw this into a beat. So that workflow from sampling to sequencing and recording is really quick and easy. There's not masses of depth to what we can do to actually manipulate the samples themselves. If we go into sample edit here, we've got a few ways we can play back the sounds. You can either play them back as simple one-shots, use a legato mode, or play them as a pitch sample using the keyboard mode, which, for example, if we're going to capture a synth note or something like that. Beyond that, we have a simple envelope for shaping, start and end, timing, control. We can also control the MIDI output for each of these pads. There's also the ability to time stretch samples, which can just be done by BPM or set to a bar within your sequence. And we also have this simple sample chopping function here, which means if we just record something like a little drum loop, we can chop that either automatically based on transients or manually by punching in timings using these keys. So we can do a little bit to manipulate and edit samples, but it's not the deepest sampling in the world compared to something like the Elektron Digitakt, for example. The third thing that I really like about the KO2 is the increased connectivity that it has compared to the KO1. So as we touched on, we've got the input here, which is something that we can sample from. We've got sync in and out, which is kind of like what you find on the pocket operators and on something like Korg Volkers, where we can use simple pulse messages to sync to analog gear. But we also have MIDI in and out. Now that MIDI actually enhances the capabilities of this quite a lot. So we can hook up a MIDI keyboard, which is a really nice way to play melodic sounds, which is a lot better than playing the little keyboard here, which does an all right job and can make use of scale modes, but really for things like, simple chords or melodies, it's nice to play this using an external MIDI controller. But we can also output MIDI. So any of these pads can be set to output on a MIDI note and channel, which means that we can actually use this quite nicely to sequence hardware gear, which makes it a fun little tool to play around with both live and in the studio. Finally, we've got this USB connection here. So this can provide power, so we can hook up to either a laptop or a power bank when we're not running off batteries, which is what we're doing now. We can run off batteries, which are placed behind this plate here, but the USB can also allow us to transfer samples. 64 megabytes of space isn't massive for a hardware sampler like this. you have 999 sample slots in the unit. But realistically, particularly if you're using stereo sounds, which we can with the KO2, you're going to run out of space a lot quicker than you will run out of those sample slots. Now, it's a shame that we haven't got anything like a SD card slot or either kind of USB slot that we could use to expand that memory. But because we've got this USB-C connection, you can quite easily hook the KO2 up to a computer. And Teenage Engineering have got a really nice little browser-based sample transfer system, which makes it really easy to drag sounds to and from the KO2. So actually, that 64 megabytes of sound storage, while it's a little bit limiting, it's quite easy to work around it if you've got a laptop handy. So 3 things that we don't love so much about the KO2. So the first is another point on connectivity. So I've talked about the things I really like about the fact that we can plug more things in, sync and use samples, transfer and things like that. But what lets the KO2 down on the connectivity front is this output. The fact that we've only got one mini jack output, which is fine and nice enough to, for example, hook up to your interface at home to record full grooves, and it means you can hook up to speakers or a PA system or whatever performing live. But for a multi-part, multi-group sampler like this, it's a shame not to have more output options. I mean, obviously, it's still kind of a small and fun bit of gear. And compared to things like, say, Korg's Volca sample, it's not unheard of not to have more outputs. But when you're comparing it to slightly higher level samplers, and particularly seeing as it's pitched as a bit more of a professional studio tool, it's a shame that we don't have more options to get sounds out of this into a DAW or into a mixer for live performance. What would have been great is to have some sort of USB audio connectivity, whether that is exporting full loops that could be bounced out and then dragged and dropped in the same way that we do with individual samples, or whether it's kind of USB audio in the way that gear from like Electron and Roland use. So it's just a shame that with the KO2 we're limited to simply using this one output and the speaker. And while the speaker is fun and quite a nice little touch for playing around with ideas on the go, it is a small speaker. It's not really a kind of professional grade thing. And it's a shame that we don't have more individual outputs or options to export loops and grooves. So the second thing that we're less in love with about the KO2 is it kind of lacks depth when it comes to creating longer form compositions. So you've got this commit function, which allows you to create, say, a drum groove, hit commit, and then add a bass part or a synth part on top of that, which is kind of a bit of a nod towards being able to create longer form compositions. But compared to the song modes that you'll find in a lot of higher end samplers or groove boxes, it's kind of a bit limited. And particularly when it comes to performing live, there's not a lot of functionality here in terms of, say, jumping between or sequencing multiple patterns to create longer songs. So it's kind of at its best when it comes to just creating those sort of instant loops and playing around and messing around with those. If you're looking for something that you can use to, say, build a full live show around or take out and about and create longer form compositions, the KO2 isn't great for that. You'd be better off looking at something like Roland's SP404 Mark II or Electron's Digitact, or even something like Polyend's Tracker or Play Plus, all of which have a lot more capabilities for building longer form compositions, song modes, and sequencing different patterns. The third thing that's a bit of a disappointment about KO2 is the implementation of the punch-in effects. Now, there's some things that are great about these. For those who haven't used Teenage Engineering gear before, punch-in effects are what Teenage Engineering call these master level effects that you can use to apply kind of cool creative sound mangling across all of your sounds in one go. So here, for example, we can create kind of stutters, different types of distortion, filtering effects, pitch effects. So they're really good for mangling sounds, and there's some cool things about the way they're implemented here. So for example, what is nice is these are pressure sensitive. So I can hold my finger down harder or less hard to apply filtering. What is also nice is the fact that you can combine these. And by doing so, you can kind of create some really cool sound mangling effects. However, the reason that I think they're a bit of a disappointment is that one of my big gripes with the Pocket Operators is that these punching effects could never be sequenced or recorded. They're really cool for applying, say, little kind of bits of sound mangling to the end of a loop. And it's really fun to do that on the fly. But for a kind of more pro-level studio tool, it would be really, really nice to, say, be able to hit record and sequence just some of those little effects that we're doing. But unfortunately, there's no way to do that. So while they're a really cool tool for doing a bit of sound mangling on the fly, it's a bit of a disappointment that you can't bake those into loops, because that would have been a really powerful creative tool. It's also slightly disappointing that these can only be applied to the master of all of your tracks at once. So the KO2 has these 4 groups here, which you can use for drums, bass, loops, synths, or, to be fair, whatever you want. You can apply your samples however you want across these 4 groups. What would have been really nice is to be able to have punching effects that affect, for example, just group A, or to be able to route your drums so that they're not processed by the punching effects, but all of your melodic parts are. So it's a shame that there's no routing option there. It's basically kind of all or nothing. You process everything as one, and there's no way to capture that. What is a really nice touch in terms of the effects is that you've got this, if we go Shift and Effects, you've got this master compressor here, which has drive and speed controls, and it can be really punchy sounding, and that's really nice for kind of just pulling a full groove together. In the effects options, you also have one send effect that can be used for all of the groups. So delay, reverb, got distortion, chorus and filtering effects, and another compressor. Now you only have one slot here, and that's applied to groups A, B and C, but you can send each group to it in different amounts. So that's a quick summary of a few of the things that we really like and a few of the things that we don't like so much about Teenage Engineering's EP113 KO2. Despite being a little bit shallow in places, I still think the KO2 is really fun. If you're looking for something that you can create longer form tracks and do more advanced sequencing and advanced sample mangling, then there's definitely better gear out there, albeit at a slightly higher price. But what this is really good at is just fun and instant playability, and the quick sampling workflow is really, really fun to play around with. Teenage Engineering have become known in recent years for some kind of higher price things, particularly their field kit gear, which kind of tops over the £1,000, $1,000 mark. And compared to that, it's nice having something from them that is retailing at around the kind of £300, $300, €300 mark. And I think that's quite a good price point for this. At that price, it's kind of okay that it's fun, and there's a lot of fun things that it can do within its remit, but just don't go in expecting something that's going to kind of replace your full DAW or act as a really advanced and powerful sampler. As for other criticisms that I've seen of it, like I said, I've heard people mention issues with build quality. That's not something that we can talk about because it's not something we've had a problem with. For what it is, there's a lot of fun to be had with the KO2. There's better and more powerful hardware samplers out there, but in terms of a fun, cool, retro-looking device, there's a lot to like about this.